The air in the lecture hall smells like stale coffee and old wood. It's a heavy, suffocating scent. I can hear the hum of the overhead projector. It sounds like a death rattle. My palms are sweating, making the laser pointer slick in my hand. I look at the committee. 3 men and 2 women. They look bored. They look like they've already decided my fate. In the center sits Dr. Sterling, my advisor, my mentor, the man who spent 5 years calling me the future of physics, while slowly draining my soul. He's leaning back, a smug grin playing on his thin lips. He looks so confident. Why wouldn't he be? He thinks he's already won. He thinks I'm the broken student he can just discard like a used lab filter. He's wearing that expensive tweed jacket, the one he bought with the bonus from the grant he stole from me. Every time he looks at me, I feel a wave of cold nausea. It's not just nerves. It's pure, unadulterated loathing. I clear my throat. My voice sounds thin, echoing in the high-ceiling room. Today, I begin. We will discuss the anomalies in quantum thermodynamic flux. I see Sterling wink at the dean. It's a small, subtle gesture. It says, "Watch me crush this girl." I feel my heart hammering against my ribs. It feels like a trapped bird. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. I remember the nights in the basement lab, the 3 a.m. breakthroughs, the way my eyes ached from staring at lines of code. I did the work. I found the signal in the noise. And then, 2 months ago, I saw his name on the paper. Only his name. When I confronted him, he didn't even blink. He told me I was unstable. He told me I was lucky he was even letting me defend. Next slide, I say. My finger hovers over the button. This is the moment. This is where my data is supposed to show the flawed results he forced me to fake. If I show those slides, I fail. I lose my visa. I go back to Seoul with nothing but debt and shame. Sterling is nodding, encouraging me to walk into the trap. I look him dead in the eyes. I don't click the next slide. I click a hidden macro. I spent 48 hours straight coding into the presentation's root directory. The screen doesn't show a graph. It goes black. Then a waveform appears. She's a workhorse, nothing more. Sterling's voice fills the room. It's crisp, clear, digital. The girl is brilliant, sure, but she's naive. I've already moved the data to the proprietary server. By the time she realizes the Nature paper is under my name, I'll have the tenure track funding secured. If she complains, I'll just tell the board she's having a mental breakdown from the pressure. Who were they going to believe? A decorated chair or a foreign grad student? The silence that follows is deafening. The dean's jaw literally drops. The woman from the ethics committee sits bolt upright. Sterling, his face goes a shade of gray I didn't know human skin could achieve. The smug grin is gone. In its place is a mask of pure, naked terror. I feel a strange calmness wash over me. The shaking stops. I look at the committee, then back at the man who tried to erase me. Actually, I say, my voice now loud and steady, I think we should start with a different topic. Let's talk about intellectual property theft and the systematic exploitation of research assistants. Because to understand how I got to this room and why I was ready to burn my entire career down just to take him with me, you need to know what happened 6 months ago. 5 years. That is exactly how much of my life I poured into the basement of the physics building. 5 years I will never get back. I came to the United States from Seoul with 1 suitcase, a scholarship, and a dream that felt bigger than the skyscrapers in Manhattan. My father worked 2 jobs, one at a dry cleaner and another as a night security guard, just so I could have the extra cash for books and decent winter coats. I was the first person in my family to go to college, let alone pursue a PhD in quantum thermodynamics. When Dr. Sterling accepted me into his research group, I actually cried. I called my parents sobbing with joy, telling them I was going to work with a legend. Dr. Sterling was a titan in the field. His name was on the cover of textbooks I had studied in Korea. In those early days, he felt like a second father. He called me his brightest star and the sharpest tool in the shed. He told me I had a natural intuition for particle physics that couldn't be taught. He made me feel special. He made me feel like I was part of something that would change the world. But looking back, the signs were always there. I was just too blinded by the prestige to see the cage he was building around me. The work was grueling. My typical day started at 6 a.m. I was always the first one in the lab. I brew the coffee. Sterling liked a very specific dark roast, and he'd complained the pot wasn't full by the time he strolled in at 9 a.m. Then I'd head down to the cryostats. The temperature in my lab was always kept near absolute zero. I became accustomed to the constant biting chill. My fingers were perpetually stained a faint shade of blue, and the tip of my nose was always red. Sterling demanded results. He didn't just ask for them, he demanded them yesterday. Jimin, he'd say, leaning against the doorframe of my cramped workstation. Science doesn't wait for us to catch up. The National Science Foundation grant expires in 6 months. If we don't find the anomaly in the flux, we're all going to be looking for new jobs. You want to stay in this country, don't you? He knew exactly which buttons to push. He knew my F1 visa was tied to my status as a full-time research assistant. He'd remind me of that fact at least once a week, usually right before asking me to work through the weekend, or pull another double shift. Your work is your ticket here, G-Min. Don't make me doubt your commitment to the program. I lived on instant ramen and sugar-free Red Bull. I kept a sleeping bag tucked behind the server racks. My friends from back home were posting photos of their weddings, their new apartments, and their vacations in Jeju. I was posting screenshots of thermodynamic noise. I was losing my hair from the stress. I had dark circles under my eyes that looked like permanent bruises, but I didn't care. I thought I was paying my dues. I thought this was the grind everyone talked about. By the 3rd year, the dynamics started to shift. It started small. Sterling would take my raw data sets, weeks of work, and say he needed to clean them up for his presentations to the Board of Regents. He'd never invite me to those meetings. It's just boring bureaucracy, G-Min. He'd say with a dismissive wave of his hand, "You're a pure scientist. You shouldn't waste your brain cells on budget meetings and faculty politics. Stay here. Focus on the code. That's where the real magic happens." I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was a tenured chair. He had $1 million house in the suburbs and a Tesla. He was the one who had given me this opportunity. But then, the magic happened. I found it. The anomaly. A spike in the quantum flux that shouldn't have existed according to the current laws of physics. It was a breakthrough. It was the kind of discovery that wins Nobel Prizes. I remember running into his office, breathless, holding the printed charts. I was shaking with excitement. He looked at the charts, and for a second I saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't pride. It was greed. Pure, cold hunger. "This is interesting," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "But it's probably just a sensor error, a calibration issue. Leave the files with me. I'll run a diagnostic on the algorithms." I spent the next month trying to recreate the results. I worked 110-hour weeks. I didn't go home for 10 days straight. I used the lab's emergency shower and ate protein bars for every meal. And every time I found the spike again, Sterling would find a reason to doubt it. He told me my methodology was sloppy. He told me I was seeing what I wanted to see. He started being more aggressive. He'd yell at me in front of the other grad students, calling me incompetent or emotional. I started to withdraw. I thought I was losing my mind. I started keeping a secret log, a backup of all my data on a private cloud drive that Sterling didn't know about. It was the only thing that kept me sane. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. Then came the morning of the nature announcement. I was in the break room, trying to get the crusty old microwave to heat up some leftover rice. One of the junior postdocs, a guy named Dave, who I usually got along with, walked in holding his iPad. He looked at me with this weird expression, part pity, part confusion. "Hey, G-Min," he said. "Congrats on the big paper. I didn't know you guys were that close to publishing." My heart stopped. "What paper, Dave?" He handed me the iPad. There it was, the prestigious journal Nature. The lead article, "New Horizons in Quantum Thermodynamic Flux." It was my research, my graphs, my anomaly, my 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears. I scrolled down to the author list. Dr. Arthur Sterling. That was it, just his name. Not even a special thanks to the lab assistants. Not a mention of the student who had actually sat in the freezing cold for 18 hours a day to collect the data. He had stripped my name from the work entirely. He had stolen my soul and put his brand on it. I felt a surge of heat go through my body, followed by a bone-deep chill. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, staring at the screen until the pixels started to blur. I realized then that Sterling didn't just want the data. He wanted me gone. If I stayed, I was a liability. I was the witness to his theft. I went to his office. I didn't knock. He was sitting there, sipping his expensive coffee, looking out the window at the campus. Ji-min, he said, not even turning around. I assume you saw the news. A great day for the department, wouldn't you say? My name isn't on it, I said. My voice was a whisper. Well, he turned around, his face a mask of fake sympathy. As I told you, your data was very raw. I had to redo almost all of the calculations myself to make it publishable. It's my reputation on the line after all. But don't worry, I'll make sure to mention your assistance in my next faculty report. Now, let's talk about your defense. I've been looking at your draft, and frankly, it's not looking good. He smiled then. It was the smile of a predator who had already cornered its prey. He told me that if I caused a scene, if I tried to claim the work was mine, he would make sure I was blacklisted from every research institution in the world. He told me he'd contact the Department of Homeland Security and report me for academic misconduct, which would lead to an immediate visa revocation and deportation. You have two choices, Ji-min, he said, leaning over his mahogany desk. You can fail your defense quietly and go back to Seoul. Or you can play along, let me take the lead on this, and maybe, just maybe, I'll find a junior teaching position for you somewhere in the Midwest in a year or two. What's it going to be? I looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't see a mentor. I saw a thief, a bully, a man who thought he was untouchable because he had a title and a fancy office. I'll think about it, I said. I walked out of that office, went straight back to the basement, and started coding. He thought he was playing a game of chess. He didn't realize I was the one who had built the board. The next 3 months were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Dr. Sterling didn't just want my research, he wanted to break my spirit so completely that I wouldn't even think about fighting back. He started by isolating me. He moved my work storage from the main lab to a literal storage closet at the end of the hallway. It was a windowless, cramped space filled with broken oscilloscopes and boxes of old cables. There was no ventilation. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and dust. We need the space in the main lab for the new postdocs, he told me, not even looking up from his phone. The Nature paper brought in a lot of interest. Real heavy hitters. I need them where the action is. You just need to finish your write-up. I didn't argue. I just moved my monitors and my secret external drives into the closet. I realized then that being invisible was actually an advantage. If you thought I was defeated, he'd stop watching me so closely. But Sterling wasn't done. He started a campaign of gaslighting that was so subtle, so insidious, that I began to doubt my own memories. During our weekly group meetings I was now required to attend but forbidden from speaking at, he would present my findings to the rest of the lab. He would intentionally misinterpret my data, framing it as a lucky fluke that he had to correct with superior mathematical modeling. He'd look at me while he spoke, his eyes challenging me to speak up. When I stayed silent, he'd smirk. It's a shame, really, he said during one particularly brutal session in front of 10 other researchers. Jimin here had the right idea, but she lacks the fundamental rigors of the Western scientific method. She gets too emotional about the numbers. She sees ghosts in the machine. Luckily, I was able to strip away the noise and find the truth she missed. I watched as the other students looked away. Some looked sorry for me. Others looked relieved it wasn't them. Dave, the postdoc who had shown me the paper, tried to catch my eye, but I kept my gaze fixed on my notebook. I was recording everything, not just the physics, but every insult, every time-stamped dismissal, and every instance where he used my proprietary algorithms without attribution. The pressure at home was just as bad. My father had fallen ill back in Seoul. Nothing life-threatening yet, but the medical bills were piling up. My parents were so proud of me. My mother would call me on Kako Talk, her face glowing on the screen as she told the neighbors that her daughter was going to be a big professor. In America, don't work too hard, Jimina, she'd say. Eat your soup. Dr. Sterling is such a good man for taking care of you. I would hang up and cry until my throat burned. How could I tell them? How could I tell them that the good man was a thief who was preparing to deport me? I felt like a failure. Every night, the same nightmare. I'm standing at the airport with my one suitcase, and Sterling is on the overhead speakers, laughing while the police take my passport. Then, Sterling upped the ante. He called me into his office and dropped a 500-page document on his desk. It was a patent application for a new type of quantum sensor based on my anomaly. I need you to sign these NDAs and the intellectual property transfer, he said, handing me a pen. I scanned the document. It was a total surrender. It stated that all work performed between 2020 and 2025 was the sole property of Starling Labs, and that I, as a technical assistant, waived all rights to any future royalties or recognition. I can't sign this, I whispered. This isn't just a lab report. This is a patent for the next 20 years of technology. Sterling stood up. He walked around the desk and leaned in close. I could smell the expensive peppermint tea on his breath. Sign it, G-Min. Or I sign the paperwork for the ethics committee today. I've already drafted the letter. It says you've been faking your lab logs for years. It says I caught you trying to sell lab secrets to a foreign tech firm. Do you think the university is going to side with a student whose visa is already under review? Or the man who just brought in a $6 million grant? My hand was shaking. I realized then that he wasn't just a bully. He was a criminal. He was willing to destroy my entire life and my family's future to protect his ego. I need to have my lawyer look at it, I said, a small lie to buy time. Sterling laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Lawyer? With what money, G-Min? You can barely afford your rent. Sign the papers by Friday, or you're out of the program. No PhD, no visa, no career. Your choice. I left his office and went back to my storage closet. I sat in the dark for a long time. The anger I felt was no longer hot and screaming. It was cold. It was a frozen, crystalline rage. I pulled out my laptop. He thought I was just a workhorse. He thought I was just a girl who was good at math. He forgot that my secondary focus in my master's program wasn't physics. It was cybersecurity and data architecture. I began to dig. If Sterling was stealing from me, he was likely stealing from the university. I accessed the lab's server logs. I tracked the grant money. I spent the next 72 hours without sleep, drinking lukewarm tap water and typing until my wrists throbbed. I found it. The $6 million grant wasn't just for research. Sterling had been using a portion of the funds to pay for consulting fees to a shell company registered in Delaware, a shell company that listed his wife as the primary stakeholder. He was laundering research money into his personal accounts. He was also borrowing data from other labs in the department, stitching together a Frankenstein's monster of research to keep the funding flowing. But I needed more. I needed a confession. I knew his schedule. Every Thursday at 4 p.m., he had a mentorship call with his old buddy at the Department of Energy. He always used the lab's secure VoP line because he was paranoid about the government listening in. He thought it was encrypted. He didn't realize that I was the one who had set up the routing protocols for that line 3 years ago. I planted a logic bomb in the lab's central server. It was a tiny piece of code, dormant and invisible. It was designed to trigger only when a specific file, my final defense presentation, was opened on the main auditorium computer. I also installed a remote recorder on his VoP line. On Thursday afternoon, I sat in my closet with my headphones on. I heard the line click. I heard him talking to his friend. Yeah, the Korean girl is handled, Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension. She's a brilliant low calculator, but she doesn't have the stomach for the big leagues. I've got her signature on the IP transfer coming Friday. After the defense next month, I'll fail her on a technicality, and she'll be on a plane back to Seoul before the ink on the patent is dry. It's perfect. No one will ever know she did the heavy lifting. He laughed. He actually laughed. I saved the file. I saved it in 3 different locations. I encrypted it and sent it to a dead man switch email address that would broadcast it to every major news outlet and the university board if I didn't check in every 24 hours. I spent the rest of the week acting like a broken person. I avoided eye contact. I slumped my shoulders. On Friday, I walked into his office and handed him a folder. I signed them, I said, my voice sounding hollow and defeated. He didn't even look at me. He just grabbed the folder and checked the signature. Good girl, G-Man. You made the right choice. Now, get back to that closet and finish those slides for the defense. I want them to look perfect for the dean. They will be perfect, Dr. Sterling, I said. You have no idea. I walked out of his office, and for the first time in months, I felt a genuine smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the big stage. The week before the defense was a living nightmare designed by a sadist. Dr. Sterling didn't just want my silence anymore. He wanted to ensure that when I walked into that room, I looked and acted like a person who had suffered a complete mental collapse. This was his insurance policy. If I tried to scream theft, during the presentation, he wanted the committee to see a girl who was hallucinating from sleep deprivation and academic pressure. He was a professional at pre-victimizing people, destroying their credibility before they even had a chance to speak. He started assigning me emergency data audits at 11 p.m., demanding they be finished by 5 a.m. These weren't real tasks. They were busy work, reformatting thousands of spreadsheets or manually checking sensor logs from 3 years ago. I spent those nights in the cold basement, my eyes burning, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type. Every time I tried to close my eyes for 10 minutes on the lab couch, he'd happen to call the lab phone or walk in, ostensibly to check on my progress. "You're looking a bit haggard, G-Man," he said one morning, peering at me with mock concern. "Are you sure you're up for this? The committee expects a level of poise. If you can't handle the stress of a simple defense, maybe we should postpone." Of course, a postponement would mean your funding ends this Friday, and we'd have to notify the International Students Office immediately. The threat was always there. The visa, the deportation, the shame. He was dangling my entire life over a cliff, waiting for me to beg him to pull me up. The real breaking point came on Wednesday, 48 hours before the defense. I was in the small departmental library, trying to print my final dissertation draft. I hadn't eaten anything but a granola bar in 24 hours. My head was spinning. As the printer hummed, I saw Dr. Sterling walk in with the dean and 2 representatives from the massive energy conglomerate that was scouting our research. They were laughing. Sterling was in full charismatic genius mode. He didn't even acknowledge I was in the room until the dean pointed at me. "And this is G-Man, right?" the dean asked. "One of the key contributors to the Nature paper?" Sterling didn't even blink. He gave a small, pitying sigh. "G-Man was a great help with the data entry, yes, but unfortunately, the pressure of the PhD track has been difficult for her. We're actually quite concerned. She's been claiming that she authored the primary algorithms." A common delusion when students get this close to the finish line, they start to internalize the mentor's work as their own. The dean looked at me with a mixture of pity and distaste. One of the corporate reps actually took a step back, as if my instability might be contagious. I stood there, holding a stack of warm paper, feeling like I was disappearing. I wasn't a person to them. I was a case study in academic burnout, a ghost. "I didn't realize data entry involved derivation of 3-dimensional flux equations," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was there. The room went ice cold. Sterling's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned into chips of obsidian. "See what I mean?" Sterling whispered to the dean, just loud enough for me to hear. "She's lost touch. It's a tragedy, really. We'll be lucky if she makes it through the presentation without a total breakdown." They walked out, leaving me standing by the printer. I felt a sob building in my chest, a deep, jagged thing that threatened to tear me apart. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and sank to the floor. The tiles were cold against my skin. I thought about my father's medical bills. I thought about the thousands of hours I'd spent staring at blue light until my vision blurred. I thought about how easy it would be to just give up, to sign whatever he wanted, take the failure, and go home. But then I felt something else. It started in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't sadness. It was a white-hot vibrating heat. He thinks I'm a ghost. I thought, fine, I'll be a poltergeist. I got up, washed my face with freezing water, and looked in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Her hair was messy, her skin was pale, and her eyes were bloodshot. But there was something in those eyes, A terrifying clarity. I went back to my storage closet. I didn't work on the audit. I didn't work on the faked slides Sterling had given me, the ones that showed inconclusive results to protect his secret patent. Instead, I opened a hidden partition on my laptop. I began to assemble the final version. I spent the next 18 hours building a digital guillotine. I didn't just want to prove I did the work. I wanted to reveal the rot at the center of the entire department. I stayed in that closet until my legs were numb. I didn't answer my phone when Sterling called. I didn't answer when the department secretary emailed me. By Thursday night, the night before the defense, I was done. The file was named Final Defense V4 Strict Confidential. To anyone looking at the file list, it looked like a standard presentation. But inside the metadata, I had embedded the VoIP recordings, the scanned copies of the original lab notebooks Sterling thought he had shredded, and the wire transfer records from a shell company. I had also written a script that would mirror the presentation to every screen in the building, the lobby monitors, the hallway displays, and the monitors in the faculty lounge. Around midnight, Dave, the postdoc, knocked on my closet door. He looked around the tiny, cramped space and sighed. He handed me a sandwich wrapped in foil. "You look like death, G-Man," he said softly. "Look, everyone knows Sterling is a shark. Just get through tomorrow. Don't fight him. He'll bury you. Just get the degree and run." "I'm not running anymore, Dave," I said, taking a bite of the sandwich. It tasted like cardboard, but I forced it down. "I'm staying right here." "He's got the dean in his pocket," Dave warned. "He's got the patent. He's got the journal." "What do you have?" I looked at my laptop screen, where the progress bar for the final encryption was reaching 100%. "I have the truth," I said. "And in physics, the truth is the only thing that doesn't decay." Dave shook his head and left. He thought I was suicidal. He thought I was walking into a buzzsaw. And I was, but I was bringing a magnet to a sword fight. I didn't sleep that last night. I sat in the dark, watching the clock tick toward 9 a.m. I practiced my opening statement over and over, not the one Sterling wrote for me. The real one. Every time I felt my resolve waver, I played the recording of him laughing on the phone, calling me a workhorse. Workhorse. The word echoed in my head. A workhorse is a powerful animal. It can pull a lot of weight, and if you push it too far, it can kick your chest in. When the sun began to rise over the campus, I stood up and stretched. My bones popped like small gunshots in the quiet room. I put on my only suit, a cheap black one I bought for interviews. I tied my hair back so tight it pulled at my scalp. I looked sharp. I looked dangerous. I grabbed my flash drive, tucked it into my pocket, and walked toward the great hall. The air was crisp and biting, just the way I liked it. This was the end of the setup. The rising tension was over. The breaking point had happened in that bathroom stall, and what came out wasn't a student. It was a reckoning. The morning of the defense felt like the walk to a gallows, but I wasn't the one with the noose around my neck. I arrived at the auditorium at 8:15 a.m. The room was massive, a tiered lecture hall with dark wood paneling and a projector screen the size of a billboard. This was where the big science happened. This was where Nobel laureates gave guest lectures. And today, it was the site of my professional execution, or so Dr. Sterling thought. I saw him near the podium, looking immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car back in Korea. He was chatting with the committee members, laughing, gesturing with a hand that held a gold-rimmed fountain pen. He looked like the king of the castle. When he saw me walk in, his smile didn't reach his eyes. He broke away from the group and intercepted me near the front row. "You're late," he hissed, his voice a sharp contrast to the jovial tone he'd used with the dean. "And you look like you slept in a dumpster. Did you bring the final file? The one I approved? I have it right here, Dr. Sterling," I said, holding up the black USB drive. I made sure my hand trembled just a little. I needed him to think I was still the terrified workhorse. "Good. Don't deviate from the script, Jimin. I have the dean sitting right there in the front row. If you so much as stutter about original authorship, I will pull the plug on this entire session and you'll be in a security office before you can finish your sentence. Am I clear?" "Perfectly clear," I whispered. He patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a slime trail, and walked back to his seat. I climbed the stairs to the podium. My heart was a drum in my ears. Bump, 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 dump. I plugged the drive into the master console. The system recognized the device. This was the moment I had spent 72 hours preparing for. While Sterling was busy mentoring the committee, I was navigating the back end of the university's media server. Most people don't realize how interconnected modern universities are. Every classroom is linked to a central IT hub. Every digital sign in the hallway, every monitor in the student union, and even the internal faculty television network is fed by the same fiber optic backbone. When I signed my IP transfer papers for Sterling, I had used a digital signature that contained a hidden script, a Trojan horse that gave my laptop administrative access to the auditorium's broadcast settings. I opened the folder. I saw two files. One was named Sterling Approved Final.pptx. The other was my logic bomb, disguised as a system driver file. I didn't just want to win a debate. I wanted to trigger a total system override. The plan was divided into 3 phases: the hook, the reveal, and the collapse. Phase 1, the hook. I would start the presentation exactly as Sterling expected. I would show the fake data. I would give him the credit. I needed the committee to be lulled into a state of boredom. I needed Sterling to feel completely safe. If he felt a hint of a threat, he'd cut the power. I had to wait until the dean was fully invested in the narrative. Phase 2, the reveal. This was the delicate part. I had embedded a time-stamped trigger in slide 12. When that slide hit the 60-second mark, the logic bomb would activate. It would lock the console, preventing anyone, including the IT tech in the back, from shutting down the feed. It would then begin to cycle through the real data, the raw logs, and the side-by-side comparisons of my original notes versus the Nature paper. Phase 3, the collapse. This was the nuclear option. Simultaneously, the audio from the VoIP recording, Sterling admitting to the theft and the plan to deport me, would begin to play over the house speakers. Not just in this room, but across every screen in the physics and engineering buildings. I wanted every student he had ever bullied, every faculty member he had ever intimidated, and every donor who had ever written him a check to hear his true voice. I looked out at the audience. The room was filling up. Gabe was there, looking nervous. A group of undergraduates from my TA class sat in the back, curious to see their scary instructor defend. And then there was the committee. 5 people who held my entire future in their hands. The dean stood up. "We are here today for the dissertation defense of Jimin Park. Her work, under the guidance of Dr. Arthur Sterling, has already made waves in the scientific community. We look forward to a rigorous discussion." He sat down. Sterling gave me a nod. It was the go signal. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself from the ceiling. I reached out and touched the keyboard. My fingers were no longer cold. They were steady. "Thank you, Dean," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the lapel mic. "Before we begin the technical breakdown of quantum thermodynamic flux, I'd like to talk about the concept of integrity in the laboratory. We often think of physics as a field of pure numbers, but numbers are only as honest as the people who record them." I saw Sterling's brow furrow. He leaned forward, his hand hovering over his notepad. He didn't like the intro. It wasn't in the script. "But let's look at the data," I said quickly, clicking to the first slide. I began the approved presentation. I spoke in a flat, rehearsed tone. I walked through the flawed calculations Sterling had forced me to include. I watched him relax. He leaned back, a smug look of satisfaction returning to his face. He even whispered something to the committee member next to him, probably taking credit for my polished speaking style. Slide 5, slide 8, slide 10. I could feel the countdown in my head. 10, 9, 8. I reached slide 12. On the screen, it showed a graph of expected versus observed results, the fake version. "And here," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "is where the anomaly supposedly disappears. Dr. Sterling suggested that the noise in this sector was a result of my own incompetence in calibrating the sensors. He suggested that the true discovery belonged to the person who could see through the errors. 3, 2, 1. The screen flickered. A blue command prompt window flashed for a millisecond, then vanished. Suddenly, the graph on the screen began to shift. The fake lines dissolved, replaced by vibrant, jagged peaks of red and gold. The real Gata. Wait, Sterling said, half rising from his chair. There's a technical glitch. G-Man, stop the feed. I'm afraid I can't do that, Dr. Sterling, I said, stepping away from the podium so everyone could see I wasn't touching the controls. The system seems to be pulling from a different source, a more accurate one. A new window popped up on the screen. It was a high-resolution scan of my lab notebook from 3 years ago, dated and time-stamped, showing the exact equations from the Nature paper. Next to it, a scan of Sterling's original draft showed he had simply copy-pasted my work into his file. The room began to murmur. The dean looked from the screen to Sterling, his face hardening. "What is this?" the dean demanded. "It's a mistake," Sterling shouted, his face turning a deep, angry purple. He scrambled toward the podium, grabbing at the mouse. "The student is unstable. I warned you, she's hacked a system to present falsified documents." He clicked frantically, but the screen was locked. A giant red padlock appeared in the corner of the display. Then, the speakers crackled. "She's a workhorse. Nothing more," Sterling's voice boomed through the hall. It was so loud it vibrated the windows. "The girl is brilliant, sure, but she's naive. I've already moved the data. By the time she realizes the Nature paper is under my name, I'll have the tenure track funding secured." Sterling froze. He was standing right next to me at the podium, his hand still on the mouse. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. The entire auditorium went deathly silent, save for his own voice echoing off the walls, detailing his plan to ruin me. I looked at him. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. I could see the terror in his eyes. "You're right, Dr. Sterling," I said, the mic picking up my whisper for the whole room to hear. "Science doesn't wait for anyone, and neither does the truth." I looked at the dean. "I believe you have some questions regarding my assistance on the grant." The auditorium was no longer a place of academic ceremony. It was a crime scene. The recording of Sterling's voice continued to loop, his callous laughter bouncing off the high ceilings like a physical weight. "If she complains, I'll just tell the board she's having a mental breakdown from the pressure." The words hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. Sterling finally snapped. He lunged for the laptop, his fingers clawing at the keyboard, but the logic bomb had encrypted the input drivers. The screen was a fortress. He began tugging at the HDMI cables, his face contorted in a mask of primal rage. He looked less like a world-renowned physicist and more like a cornered animal trying to chew its way out of a trap. "Turn it off! Someone turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He turned to the IT tech in the booth, who was standing there with his hands up, completely bewildered. "You! I'll have your job. Shut down the server." The dean stood up. He didn't use a microphone, but his voice carried over the chaos. "Sit down, Arthur. She's lying. This is a deepfake. She's used AI to mimic my voice." Sterling was hyperventilating now, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's a disgruntled student. She's failing. This is a desperate attempt to sabotage my career because she couldn't hack the research. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to." I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out the physical copies of the original lab logs, the ones he thought I had shredded. I walked down the steps of the podium and handed them directly to the woman from the ethics committee. "These are the primary source documents," I said, my voice calm, almost clinical. "They contain the handwritten derivations for the flex equations. You'll notice the coffee stain on page 42. That's from the night I spent in the lab on November 14th, 2023. If you check the security badge logs for that night, you'll see I was the only person in the building for 18 hours. Dr. Sterling was at a gala in D.C. The committee member took the papers with a grim expression. She began flipping through them, her eyes widening as she realized the level of detail. These weren't just notes, they were the blueprint for the discovery that had made Sterling famous overnight. The screen then shifted to phase 3 of my plan. It wasn't just my data anymore. A series of internal emails appeared, emails I had recovered from the deleted items folder of the lab's shared drive. They were messages between Sterling and the shell company in Delaware. Payment received for consulting, transferring the next $50,000 from the NSF account tonight. The room gasped. This wasn't just academic theft anymore. This was federal grant fraud. The dean's face went from angry to ashen. The corporate representatives from the energy conglomerate were already on their phones, likely calling their legal teams to distance themselves from the radioactive mess that was now Arthur Sterling. "You're done, Arthur," the dean said, his voice cold and final. "Get away from the podium. You're taking her side," Sterling shrieked. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but he found only a sea of disgusted faces. Even the undergraduates in the back were filming the meltdown on their phones. "I built this department. I brought in the money. Without me, this university is nothing but a third-rate community college." That was the final nail. He had insulted the very institution he thought he owned. Sterling turned back to me. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. He took a step forward, his fists clenched, his eyes bulging. I gave you everything. I brought you to this country. I gave you a future." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. "I didn't flinch. You gave me a storage closet and a pile your work to fix. I gave you the only discovery people will remember your name for. But after today, they won't remember you for the physics. They'll remember you as the man who was too lazy to do his own math and too arrogant to realize his workhorse was smarter than him." Security finally arrived. 2 uniformed officers walked down the aisle. They didn't go for me. They went straight to Sterling. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of the officers said, placing a hand on his arm. "Don't touch me! Do you know who I am?" Sterling tried to shake them off, but he was a 60-year-old man who spent most of his time behind a desk. They led him out of the auditorium. As he passed the front row, he tripped, his expensive tweed jacket catching on a chair. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The smug, untouchable titan of the physics world was being dragged out like a common shoplifter. As the doors closed behind him, a heavy silence settled over the room. The recording had finally stopped. The screen was now just displaying my original, unedited abstract, "The Discovery of Quantum Flux Anomalies" by G-Min Park. The dean walked up to the podium. He looked at the screen, then at the committee, and finally at me. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 20 minutes. "Miss Park," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "it appears we owe you a profound apology and a very, very long conversation." "I have the time," I said. "But first, I'd like to finish my defense. I have 70 more slides on the actual science, and I think you'll find the real results are far more interesting than the ones Dr. Sterling tried to sell you." The committee looked at each other. Then, one by one, they sat back down. The woman from the ethics committee nodded at me. "Please," she said, "proceed." I spent the next 2 hours giving the lecture of my life. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't speaking for a grade or a visa. I was speaking for myself. I explained the beauty of the particles, the way the energy shifted in the vacuum, the sheer breathtaking logic of the universe. When I finished, the room didn't just clap. They stood up. Dave was the first one to cheer. Soon the entire hall was filled with the sound of applause, a sound I had never heard in all my years in that basement. I looked at the front row. The dean was clapping too. I had done it. I had survived the breaking point, and I had come out the other side with the only thing Sterling could never steal, my voice. The fallout from my defense didn't just shake the university. It sent shockwaves through the entire global scientific community. You don't just accuse a man like Arthur Sterling of federal fraud and walk away without a media firestorm. Within 24 hours, the story was on the front page of every major tech and science outlet. The ghost in the machine, how a grad student exposed physics' biggest fraud. The university's legal team moved with terrifying speed. They weren't trying to protect Sterling. They were trying to save themselves from the massive lawsuits they knew were coming. Dr. Sterling was placed on immediate administrative leave, which was upgraded to termination for cause. Within 48 hours after the internal audit confirmed the shell company transfers I had discovered, he didn't just lose his tenure, he lost his reputation, his pension, and his dignity. Last I heard, the FBI's white-collar crime division had taken over the investigation into the NSF grant fraud. Sterling is facing multiple felony counts. He's currently out on bail, living in a small apartment after his wife, the one who was consulting for his shell company, filed for divorce and froze their joint assets. He's gone from being the titan of thermodynamics to a man who can't even get a job as a substitute high school teacher. No one wants to touch him. He's academic radiation. As for me, the transition was surreal. The dean personally called me into his office the Monday after the defense. He offered me a full, expedited PhD, retroactive to the date of my presentation. But he went further. He offered me a 3-year postdoctoral fellowship with a salary that made my eyes water, enough to pay off all my father's medical bills in a single wire transfer. Jimin, he told me, looking me in the eye with genuine respect, we failed you. The system is designed to trust the advisor, and Arthur exploited that trust. We can't give you back the 5 years you spent in that closet, but we can make sure the next 50 are yours to command. I didn't take the fellowship. I realized that staying at the university would always remind me of the cold basement and the smell of ozone. I needed a fresh start. I accepted an offer from a private research institute in Switzerland, CERN. They didn't care about my visa status or my lack of Western rigor. They cared about the math. They flew me and my parents out to Geneva for the signing ceremony. Seeing my mother's face as she looked at the Alps was worth every second of the hell I went through. The Nature paper was retracted and republished 2 months later. This time, there was only one name on the lead author line, Jimin Park. Below it, in the acknowledgments, I didn't mention Sterling. Instead, I thanked all the lab assistants and students whose names are often left in the shadows. Dave, the postdoc who had tried to help me, ended up taking over Sterling's lab. We still talk sometimes. He told me that after I left, they found a stash of rejected papers in Sterling's private safe. He had been doing this for decades, stealing the best ideas from international students and discarding them when they got too close to the truth. I wasn't his first victim, but I was definitely his last. My life is different now. I don't live on ramen, and I don't sleep behind server racks. I have a lab with floor-to-ceiling windows and a team of researchers who know that my door is always open. I make it a point to check on every grad student personally. I ask them about their lives, their families, and their dreams. I never let them stay past 6 p.m. unless it's an absolute emergency. Every now and then, I get a message on LinkedIn from a Dr. A. Sterling. He's looking for consulting opportunities or character references. I never reply. I don't even delete them. I just leave them in my read folder, a digital graveyard for a man who thought he could own the truth. I learned something important during those 5 years. Physics tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. Sterling tried to destroy my energy, but all he did was transform it into something harder, sharper, and far more powerful than he could ever imagine. I'm no longer a workhorse. I'm the one who owns the field.